Good morning. Welcome to the International Seating Symposium Virtual Professional Summit 2026. This is day one on Wednesday, January 28th. We thank you all for joining us live, and for those that might be watching later, thank you for participating. Just a few housekeeping things before we get right into our first session. We would like to thank our 4 premier partners for the Virtual Professional Summit, both today and day 2 in February. You'll be hearing from 2 of the premier partners today, Specs and Quantum, and 2 on February 28th, Permobial and Sunrise Medical. They have exciting product updates, education, and each will be doing 30-minute sessions for contact hour credits. We have 5 additional supporters to thank: Drive Medical, Matrix Seating, Munevo, National Seating and Mobility, and Tolt Technologies. Thanks to all of our partners and supporters for the Virtual Professional Summit. Briefly, we have the agenda for today on the screen. We are starting with a panel on advancing wheelchair skills training this morning. We'll have the supporter spotlight for Specs at 11:15 Eastern Time. At noon Eastern Time, another panel hosted by Jean Minkle. 2:30, the second supporter spotlight with Quantum Rehab. And at 4 p.m. Eastern, State of the Science with Pediatric Powered Mobility with Doctors Feldner and Kenyon. Other logistical updates for today: the Q&A is available during sessions for questions or chats, comments that you have for presenters. Additionally, in the online course page, there are discussion boards, a general one for course updates or questions for the ISS team, as well as discussion boards for each educational session that you can use either live or after the sessions if you'd like to ask more questions, comments, or share how you do things in your practice. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the first session of the ISS VPS 2026, Advancing Wheelchair Skills Training, Evidence, Lived Experience, and Real-World Implementation, moderated today by Dr. Lynn Worobey.
Thanks, Rachel. We are so excited to be kicking off this virtual conference with you this morning. As a little context for the session that you'll sit through now, wheelchair skills are something that we know are really critical for safety, independence, and participation. Yet, many manual wheelchair users don't receive structured or ongoing training in this domain. And at the same time, clinicians and suppliers are sort of met with decreasing lengths of stay, competing demands, and sometimes challenges with getting what the evidence tells us into actual practice. So I'm joined by a really strong panel this morning that is a combination of researchers, clinicians, and people with lived experience that are here to talk about some of the new current evidence, what's actually happening on the ground, and maybe some suggestions for how we move the field forward. So I'm going to start off and just have our panelists introduce themselves. If you can each share your name, your role, and how wheelchair skills training shows up in your work or life. Tatiana, if you can start us off.
Hi, I'm Tatiana Dib. I'm an occupational therapist in Montreal, Quebec. I'm also a PhD candidate under the supervision of Paula Rushton and Krista Best at Université de Montréal. I've been an occupational therapist for 15 years and have worked with wheelchair users, pediatric wheelchair users, since I graduated. And wheelchair skills training really became important in my practice in 2017. And ever since, I've been trying I've been using it with clients, but also trying to implement it in the settings in Montreal for now and hopefully and beyond in the next few years.
Travis, maybe you can introduce yourself next.
Yeah, my name is Travis Younts. My role is as peer coach with the virtual skill study. And looking back, it looks like we've been at that since October of 24. I think I've worked with 22 people at this point. And I'm a full-time wheelchair user. So 30 years. spinal cord injury, injury level T12. So that's how wheelchair skills enter into the uh, work or life for me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Kathleen.
I'm Kathleen Decina. I'm a physical therapist at the spinal cord injury unit at the Seattle VA. I've worked there for about 9 years and have practiced there in a mix of inpatient and outpatient rehab. These days, I'm mostly on the outpatient side. I work with veterans with spinal cord injury from time of their initial rehab through end of life, and work with a mixed caseload of some who have completed their initial rehab with us or within the VA system, some who've come from other private sector rehabs, or some who maybe never had formal rehab at all. Wheelchair skills show up in my everyday practice. I use them, in isolation as a training tool to help facilitate independence and community integration. And they also really go hand in hand with the other big role, which is wheelchair prescription adjustments and posture and seating interventions.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Darcy.
Morning. My name is Darcy Erickson. I'm an occupational therapist and have been for over 25 years. I am at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, where I do predominantly spinal cord injury, but also anything in the neurologic spectrum from the ICU all the way through outpatient. So I spend most of my time clinically now in our outpatient wheelchair clinic. And so that's where I really dive into wheelchair skills training, as well as mentoring and coaching our staff, our inpatient rehab unit, along with our clinical leads.
All right. Thank you all so much. Tatiana, I think it would be great if we could start with you. I know that some of your recent work has focused on examining wheelchair skills training in a school setting, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what that evidence says for training youth and adolescents.
Thank you. So yes, recently we did conduct a single group pre-post study with 11 participants who are youth wheelchair users, so adolescents between 12 and 21 in a specialized school. And this intervention is run by the rehab and education team at this high school at Joseph Charbonneau in Montreal. And it's called the Groupe Endurance. And what was special about this study is that it was conducted in the youth high school. And the intervention was offered in this real life school setting in Montreal, Quebec throughout the school year. And the results suggest that training youth using the wheelchair skills training program, so Dalhousie University's WSTP, improves wheelchair skill capacity. So kids and youths, well, not, in this situation, youth's ability to perform wheelchair skills. We also in this study noted improvements with endurance, propulsion endurance. And this publication joins 5 other single group studies that explore the influence of wheelchair skills training in children and youth in a variety of settings. So in rehab, in dance camps, and in community organizations. And each suggests a positive influence of training these skills on children and youth's manual wheelchair skills, some with power chairs as well, and their confidence and satisfaction with participation in relation to wheelchair skill related activities. And we are recently preparing a manuscript documenting the results of the effectiveness of the wheelchair skills training program. So it's the first randomized controlled trial with children and youth aged between 3 and 21 years old. And it does suggest effectiveness of training manual wheelchair skills on their capacity to perform these skills. So we can be confident in improving manual wheelchair skills capacity through training. And it's similar to the evidence that we see with the adult population, where we have 17 randomized controlled trials and 2 meta-analyses showing the strong evidence of the effectiveness of training manual wheelchair skills, or wheelchair skills in general. However, we do note that improvements documented in terms of confidence and satisfaction with participation are interesting in pediatrics, so with youth and children, but these results are still exploratory. So that just sums up the evidence that we have for youth and children.
Perfect. Thank you for that. A follow-up question. I think that as we think about how to do more training, thinking about other settings to deliver it is helpful. What are some things that you think are maybe strengths of delivering in a community or school setting, of things that you can do that you maybe couldn't do in a clinical setting?
So community or schools are places where children and youth it's in their daily life, community settings and school settings. So these are places where they go to socialize, to learn, actively participate in various activities, such as physical education class, which was the case with the Groupe Endurance, the first study that I spoke of, recess, or extracurricular activities. And these are the real life settings. And what we know about training wheelchair skills and motor learning is that variability of practice brings skill generalization. So being able to practice the skill itself in a clinical setting is one thing, but then practicing it in a real life setting brings variability of practice and helps the child or youth generalize. So it's less evident to offer the same level of variability of practice in a clinical setting that is often adapted. And school and community settings are also where youth, like I said, socialize with other youth, and the setting itself lends itself to peer-led approaches. One study by Willett and colleagues documented community-based peer-led interventions for both manual and power chair users, and that's where we were able to integrate peer-led training in a community setting. And wheelchair skills training interventions that are offered in high schools, for example, in a physical education class, or can also be used in another school setting, for example, in the hallways or in the class itself or outdoors at recess, is also very interesting for children and youth. One intervention that we are implementing right now is what we call the 3-2-1 Let's Roll intervention, which is an intervention group integrating wheelchair skills training and in the school setting. And what is interesting is that kids are available to receive it. For example, when we have interventions given in clinic, we often have to take appointments. Parents have to leave their work or their schedules, their busy schedules, and come in to receive training versus having this intervention offered in a school setting. The children are readily available to receive training. In addition, we have personnel that knows the students very well and that can integrate training within the daily routine. So practice intensity is more easily offered in a school setting or in the community versus in a clinical setting. And if I have time, I'll just say this last thing. What stands out the most in offering training in the community is that skills are practiced in a setting that is significant to the child or to the youth. For example, in our randomized controlled trial, where we were able to go into the community to offer training, I had already given training in a playground where there were water games, and the child was able to practice reaching to the floor by going to activate a button to activate the water fountain. So instead of reaching to the floor to get an object, which we find in a school setting or in their home setting, we were able to integrate that in a very significant, playful manner. And another example, again in our randomized controlled trial, is where a youth wanted to access their favorite comic book store and had a 15-centimeter threshold to access it before entering. This youth did not want to go outdoors in the winter, but he was motivated to do this, to go outdoors and practice these skills because he wanted to access his favorite comic book store. So having interventions in the community or in school settings enhances motivation to practice, which we do not necessarily see in the clinical setting.
Thanks so much. It's really exciting to hear research meeting real world and those strategies that you're using for implementation. Darcy, I'm going to pivot to you for my next question. I think that there are some strategies that lend themselves well sort of across the lifespan, and then maybe some that need a little bit more tailoring. I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Thank you, Lynn. I'm going to play off of Tatiana a little bit and talk about exploration because regardless of age, I think we all need the ability to explore opportunities. And one thing that is a limiter in the clinical setting is how much we have for options to explore that. So we really lean on our vendor partners to provide us with additional equipment or options that might help someone feel ready to take on a different task. But sometimes I think things that are more specific to adults is that we are self-limiters. Sometimes children are more open to new things. They're less fearful of new things sometimes. And especially after someone who's an adult or older adult has been injured in a traumatic way, fear can be a real issue. And so providing challenges they're ready for in a safe location and in a safe manner is really important in order to build confidence in their own skills and that openness to test their boundaries and to take on some new challenges. But timing is, I think, one of our biggest challenges. And again, to Tatiana's point, we're in a clinical setting, not in the real world. And so as much as we would like to bring them out in the real world, I only have, 15 to 20 some days to try to get someone through inpatient rehab. And a lot of times we still have a lot of orthopedic or activity restrictions. And so things that someone might be mentally ready to try to challenge, physically, they are not. Or if they're physically ready to maybe take on a challenge, emotionally, they are not. And I think one of the other things that can be a challenge for us is the priority of wheelchair skills building over ambulation. People feel like they're pushed to need to return to normal or to be an ambulator. And so sometimes we're not going to get that readiness to prioritize wheelchair skills training until someone gets out of the hospital, gets home, and realizes how limited they might be in either way, whether their wheelchair is, they're limited because they don't have the skills to go where they want to go, or they're not walking near as much as they were in rehab when they had a lot of people to assist and a lot of support. And they really recognize the need to rely on the wheelchair. And again, it goes back to, I don't have the skills I need to go the places I want. So that is when we really want to focus on that in their outpatient setting, because that readiness is there, their restrictions have been lifted, and now they're ready to focus on that as well.
Thank you so much, Darcy. Building on that, Travis, I have a question for you. I'm curious, your thoughts on gaps maybe in terms of the skills that people need, and then what they're actually learning in clinical settings.
Yeah, okay. Well, and again, Lynn, thanks for sending over this outline. I spent some time going down it and making some notes. I'll try to make it seem like I'm not reading, but if it seems that way, it's because I am.
Thanks.
But my clinical experience has been positive. I think that the clinical part is really important. I think that having like trained eyes on you is important at all stages. Early injury as the curve flattens 20 years plus beyond. I just think the knowledge of professionals and just that experience of someone who's seen hundreds of cases similar to yours is an important part of this. The gap for me probably would be consistency over an extended period of time. I feel like the clinical approach is maybe intermittent at best. It seems kind of reactive. Sometimes it's just like a snapshot. I think that more consistent attention over an extended period allows better programs to be developed that just allows for things that take more time to play out. Sometimes just getting a wheelchair set up correct can take multiple visits. Sometimes we're dealing with people who need to change their bodies. Need to develop upper body strength. And these are things that take a while to do. it's hard to get that with the more traditional attention, you know. Um, that's something that I think the virtual stuff really lends itself to is building out a timeline that fits a person as far as what they need to do, giving us the flexibility to check in with them and be consistent and hold them accountable or try to, all of that stuff. If there's a gap for me between clinic and what we're doing virtually, it's that consistency over an extended period of time.
And then I'm curious, are there skills that you think are maybe being taught really well clinically, or things that you know that people just aren't getting that training in, but they need that training in?
Um, I mean, I think all the skills are really taught well clinically. I don't think you have to, you know, be a full-time wheelchair user or something in order to be able to teach this stuff. Um, my experience, my exposure to it, I go down to a PT clinic 3 times a month for VPS bike work, and I'm just kind of around while people are receiving treatment. I think the wheelchair training is good. I just think that it's often happening at a point where the person may not be necessarily ready for parts or pieces that they may need. They may be using equipment that's not ultimately what it needs to be or what they'll be using more long term. Um, I think that the people who are teaching it are doing a good job. I just think that there's so many variables, that you have to be able to account for, and it's hard to do when you're trying to do it in person and in a small window.
Thanks so much. Kathleen, my next question will be for you. We've talked a little bit about kind of structured pathways to getting to wheelchair skills training, but we know that not everybody follows those. Whether it's that they didn't go through inpatient rehab, they acquired a disability later in life, they use a wheelchair intermittently. I wonder maybe what suggestions do you have for those groups to accessing wheelchair skills training?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I think that's a really important question to dive into. I think there's many reasons why wheelchair skills might not be fully optimized in that initial rehab, or maybe someone doesn't have access to that rehab. There's time and limitations. There's orthopedic restrictions. I think Travis just mentioned, sometimes they don't have that equipment that's actually going to be their permanent wheelchair. I do find this is not the case for everybody, but in general, I observe that wheelchair users who don't learn some of those wheelchair skills in initial rehab sometimes have lack of awareness that those high level skills even exist. Or maybe they're aware that they exist, but they have some apprehension and fear about learning them. Since at this point, maybe they've just kind of puttered around on level surfaces and haven't really had those boundaries pushed. So I think a very initial starting point is education and diving deep into goals for community and recreation and leisure access. And sometimes that means getting people involved with peer supporters or looping in family members and friends, finding out what is important to them, exploring their world, figuring out where to get that buy-in and motivation. And then once you have that, I think wheelchair skills can be an outpatient intervention. There's lots of resources out there for clinicians who maybe don't even know what the skills are. But if you can have a partnership with a patient and a clinician who knows how to train those skills, I think the key part in the outpatient setting is then looping in a caregiver, friend, or family member who can come to sessions and learn those skills, because just coming to outpatient PT once or twice a week is probably not enough to really carry over and progress those skills. We need daily practice. Maybe we're starting with pop-ups and wheelies, but then who at home can help them train that throughout the week to get confidence? And then also checking back in with their therapist or the clinician who's prescribing equipment, because sometimes wheelchair adjustments are needed as those skills progress. Part of the question was talking about those who might only use a wheelchair intermittently. I think this population is really in a challenging spot in initial rehab because we often have a lot of goals and not enough time. Someone might be doing some walking, using a wheelchair some of the time. And if we don't know their exact prognosis, how do we best optimize and train them to optimize overall independence and autonomy? I think one strategy for that is really understanding early on that wheelchair use and wheelchair skills is a tool in their toolbox. And even if they're still working on gait and ambulation, having that important tool in their toolbox might help them optimize both their household and their community access. I think both clinicians and patients get really excited about that gait training. So we don't need to stop that. It's just working towards both, being realistic about both, and including both options in someone's home exercise program. I also think if someone did not have that initial rehab early on, that's where really looping people in with either peer supporters or some sort of sports or recreation to get people in an environment that might have a little bit of structure to it.
Thanks so much. This kind of theme of peer training has come up a bunch, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. Travis, this next question is for you. What are some things that you think wheelchair users can gain from either a peer-led or a peer-supported training that's hard to replicate in traditional therapy?
Um, in my experience, I have found that the peer-led or peer-supported stuff, um, it kind of becomes more of an exchange, you know. The learning happens both ways. I've worked with a couple of older guys um, who have more time in a chair than me, and I probably took more away from them than they did from me. Um, Not from a skill standpoint. I mean, the skills that they had lost, they had no real interest in regaining, but from more global stuff like nutrition or network building or just stuff that's bigger picture as far as like wheelchair life. Um, Being able to like open up the conversation to things like emotional or psychological effects, um, bodily function, whatever. Uh, when you're having those conversations as part of your wheelchair skill uh, approach, it just allows you, I think, to connect with someone who's having a similar experience. Um, I think it allows you to connect in a way that allows the teaching to maybe have a little more weight. Um, let's see, what else did I write? Um, let's see, when you share the experience, it almost naturally becomes an exchange. Um, yes, the trainee is coming in with a need, but they oftentimes are also bringing something, something that is of value to me that I can be open to receiving in a real way that I think enhances the training. Um, my focus is the wheelchair skills, and I want to stay on task as much as possible. But a lot of times, things open up in a way that make the training um, even more successful for things beyond the wheelchair skills. And, that's obviously a peer connection type of thing.
Maybe a follow-up question for that. I know that the training that you've been doing has been virtual, and I wonder about the differences in doing this virtual versus in person, and maybe what's gone well, and maybe what are some of those barriers too that's tough when you're not in person.
I mean, there are some barriers by not being hands-on. Um, it's not things that we can't work through, on a long enough timeline. Um, Virtually is worked well in my experience. We're able to, um, it's a very private setting, like I was getting to before. It lends itself to uh, broader subjects that people are interested in getting advice about. Um, I think it works great. I really do. I mean, I know that our study has been more about this approach being feasible as a way to do it. So we've limited our number of sessions and the timeline, but I think over an extended period of time, I think that the virtual approach is an excellent way to go.
Great. Thanks, Travis. Tatiana, I'm going to loop back to something you said in the beginning. You had talked a little bit about the evidence behind peer training, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that and maybe how it can complement sort of formal clinician training.
What Travis just mentioned is very interesting because that's what we do see in the evidence. And what I'm referring to is how peer-led interventions have such power because we can provide mentorship, because we can provide the peers can provide support for wheelchair users by sharing life experiences and which can influence changes in behavior. And in this case, the change in behavior we are looking at is using wheelchair skills to negotiate obstacles in daily life settings. Another thing that we see in evidence, so for example, Willetta and colleagues, with their Seating to Go peer-led study, is vicarious experience. So by providing this experience, having somebody else perform the task and seeing somebody else perform the task who has lived experience, so a peer trainer who has lived this experience, unlike a clinician who may have the sharpened eyes, as Travis mentioned before, the experimented eyes. A peer trainer does have lived experience. What's also interesting is in our ongoing qualitative study, where we captured children and youth's perspectives, experiences with formal training versus peer-led training. So as they commented about the formal training, they did mention that they would appreciate having a peer trainer in future studies or in future experiences, namely other wheelchair users. And they mentioned that this provides them a credible source of information because the person has lived experience. Another thing that we have been developing with a patient partner are educational videos. And this patient partner did mention that he is happy to be part of these videos and be the star of the videos because he thinks that other youth and children watching him will be appreciative of seeing a similar age wheelchair user perform the same skills as they are being taught. So this is what's interesting about the peer-informed models versus formal training from an evidence perspective. One last thing I will say is that training by peers can have the vicarious experience benefits. So watching somebody else do the skill, but having a group intervention as well brings that same benefit. And we see this with our 3-2-1 Let's Roll group in the school setting, where children participated in a group intervention and were motivated to learn wheelchair skills with their friends and were excited to see their friends to get the training at the same time as them. And this was also expressed by the participants in our randomized control trial. As much as they also mentioned peer-led training, they also mentioned receiving training in a group context. So really the evidence points to bonifying formal training with both community and peer-led approaches.
Great. Thanks so much. Kathleen, thinking about those sort of two approaches in tandem and maybe confidence specifically, what are sort of different roles that you think maybe clinicians and peers might play in building that confidence?
Yeah, I think that clinician and peer can provide so much support for confidence in different ways. I think of it almost like a coach versus teammate situation, the clinician being the coach and peers being the teammates. And I think we really need both to be most successful. I think clinicians have a lot of expertise and skills to safely guard and safely create scenarios in kind of a slow, controlled learning environment. And I think that can help really build confidence early on. And I think also looping back into how wheelchair skills fit into their posture and wheelchair setup can help build confidence. On the other hand, a peer who has lived experience, I think, is going to have invaluable insight about real life scenarios and navigating the world in a wheelchair. And hearing from a peer and sharing with a peer can help build confidence within. Maybe they see aspects of themselves in their peer and can build that from within rather than a clinician telling it to them. I think if we go back to this analogy of coach versus teammate, we really need a balance of both. I think if we're swinging too far one direction or the other, opportunities might be missed. If someone's only ever getting feedback from a coach, they might feel like an outsider is just telling them what they should be doing. And that might not be the most confident building scenario. On the other hand, if someone is only getting learning from their peers or teammates, they might miss some kind of bigger picture bird's eye view that someone might see from the sidelines. I think when I sometimes run into barriers about confidence with learning wheelchair skills, I help by relying on other disciplines, whether that's our psychology team or a rec therapy team, or potentially our peer supporters.
Thanks so much. I think sometimes, even when clinicians value wheelchair skills training, they still see a lot of barriers. So, whether it's their own confidence in teaching, time, or resources, those often come up. Tatiana, one of the things that we've heard from clinicians is that they perceive wheelchair skills training to be more like equipment heavy and equipment requiring than some other interventions. I'm curious, sort of your thought on that, and then maybe what you think is the bare minimum for what somebody can successfully deliver wheelchair skills training with.
So I do understand the perception, namely because the obstacles found in the community cannot always be replicated and or accessible in a clinical setting. What I do want to share is how we overcame that barrier in the school setting to conduct the 3-2-1 Let's Roll intervention. The school and surrounding outdoor context allowed us to practice certain skills outdoors when the weather permits, of course. We are in Montreal, so we do have many months of snow and cold, and children, youth don't always enjoy being outside for a long period of time, especially when they want to wheel their wheelchairs. So we also had to have a solution that is low cost and easily accessible. So materials such as pool noodles or bubble wrap can be used to simulate thresholds. Therapeutic mats that we find in a physiotherapy gym or an occupational therapy clinic imitate soft surfaces such as grass or gravel. Definitely not the same, but it can help simulate the skill. Folded tables can be used as level changes, and they can be stabilized against the wall. They could be stabilized with bricks. And these were all solutions that were applied and were appreciated by the clinical and the education teams at the school. And these are also low-cost material. These are examples that are suggested by the wheelchair skills training program. And in terms of creating activities, we just used what was readily available in the setting. So buying expensive material is not necessary, though I do understand that sometimes we do want to have that. It may be beneficial to have the more robust equipment, and we have assisted clinicians in applying for funding to purchase these equipment. However, it isn't necessary. For example, the 3-2-1 Let's Roll group is going to be given for the 10th time this spring, and the clinicians have been using the material that I mentioned that is readily available in the school setting or that is very low cost.
Thank you. Darcy, I'm imagining that as a supervisor, you've got a role in kind of onboarding new clinicians. I'm curious sort of how clinicians learn to teach wheelchair skills at your institution.
So very similar to the way that everyone does it. We explore, we try different things. We've failed a lot, and then we've learned from those failures to build better skills. One of the things that we've started doing in the last couple of years is boot camps. They're really specific to equipment, and then we have more advanced ones for skills development. We really try to get to people's initial comfort of being able to understand where they need to focus when they have a patient who has to discharge in 25 days or less. And then we do have people that really find a passion for it and want to take their skills further. And that's where the boot camps come in, where we can really focus on getting the basics down and then taking it to the next level. We specifically target people that have that passion because they're the ones who are going to be our trainers of other employees. And so that can be at times, additionally time consuming and a lot of time spent sometimes outside the clinic building skills up that you want to train others or finding ways to help learners learn. And so I think having ways that we can target people that have a real passion for it as being our educators because they bring a lot of enthusiasm to the training helps our new employees feel like they're with someone who knows, they're with someone who's going to allow them to fail and learn in their own safe way, and then gives them a kind of a backup, someone who they can go get help from if they've got a patient who they're concerned about or they're feeling I'm not confident to teach this skill, that they can buddy with so that they're learning at the same time and with the patient and being able to apply it in a real life situation versus a lot of didactics that in 6 months I might use and I've forgotten a lot of what I learned at that time. We also get to have some time at our national wheelchair camp, which is done every summer. And it's about 15 minutes from Rochester. And it brings in adults and youth and children from all over the nation and Canada to do a lot. They spend a whole week and a half at camp. And so there's horseback riding, there's wheelchair parkour, which if you've never seen that, will totally open your eyes as to what is possible. And so we've got people of all ages learning from each other. And to your point, Travis, I think we spend more time learning than teaching when we're there. Just learning from what people find to be helpful to them, what were things that weren't helpful to them when they were in rehab or outpatient, so that we can do better for our next set of patients.
Thanks, Darcy. Kathleen, I wonder if you could reflect on maybe some suggestions of, as a field, what could we do to make clinicians sort of more confident and more ready to teach these skills in practice?
Yeah, in terms of increasing that confidence and readiness for teaching, I think a lot of it starts with you yourself understanding the skill, how to do the skill yourself, and then once you know how to do the skill, you can teach it. When I started at my clinic, had the luxury of having some really passionate mentors and educators in wheelchair skills who got me in a chair and practiced skills with me. I think that is the crucial starting point. But I think to really have confidence to teach it to others, we have to build and expand on those skills and learn a lot from the patients that we are working with and the peers that we are working with. I find that I'm still learning wheelchair skills. I maybe am very confident teaching it to a certain injury level or a certain presentation. Then all of a sudden, the patient in front of me has a different presentation, a different strength asymmetry, or a different orthopedic factor that I'm working on. And I think what's been really crucial for me is having some colleagues who I can rely on to problem solve. Maybe the day before I have this appointment on my schedule, we get ourselves in a chair, we problem solve, think about what may or may not work. And also feeling comfortable leaning on some of our veterans with chronic injuries who might be willing to come in and demonstrate skills, because those of us who have intact strength and intact sensation and core strength are not going to be able to completely mimic. So teaching to somebody new sometimes requires building confidence in somebody who can already do that skill and might let you use them as a demonstration or a guinea pig for your own learning.
And then I'm going to piggyback one question on that. The VA system, I think, is different than what some others may see in like larger healthcare systems. What are the things that maybe make a difference policy-wise or in terms of how you can operate in that system that others might not have?
Yeah, I think one unique benefit that we have at the VA system is a system in place for different kind of facilities who are champions in a certain diagnosis or presentation. For example, for spinal cord injury specifically, we have a hub and spoke system, that we have certain clinics throughout the region who are really identified as champions of that type of rehab. So if we can get veterans traveled out to those sites, they have tons of resources available to them, and we often provide assistance with that transportation and that lodging. I think another real big crucial piece of the puzzle is following these people over time throughout their life. We do annual evaluations for all of the patients that we see, and these annual evaluations, we're doing a full interdisciplinary checkup with all the disciplines, doctors, therapists, psychologists, social workers, recreation therapists. And here we can understand what's really going well, and then how can we progress and meet more goals, or maybe we identify gaps and things that are not working well, and then we can develop a plan. If we do these annual evaluations, we might determine, okay, here's a gap. This is something that I think you can go back to your community, work with outpatient PT or OT on, and work on that gap. Or maybe this is a really specialized thing that we need some more specialized support, and we have the ability to admit people back to our unit for what we call either a therapy admission or an advanced rehab admission if we need a couple of weeks of daily rehab to fill that gap.
Thank you so much. Darcy, I'm thinking about sort of larger health systems, and there's often a culture that comes with wheelchair skills training, like it's something that's embraced or not. And I wonder if you have thoughts on things that maybe make it feasible or things that make it fragile in that context.
I think what makes it a little more fragile, especially in our system, is that we are the neurospecialists for a 1,200 bed hospital. So we are the neuro specialists that need to be in the ICU, on the acute care floors, in the IRF rehab setting, and in outpatient. And we specialize in brain or spine and subspecialize in AT, wheelchair. And so the group gets smaller and smaller the more you subspecialize. And so we could spend months up in the acute care setting where we're not really focusing on wheelchair skills, a few weeks in inpatient rehab, and then we're back to outpatient again. But it might be on the brain side instead of the spine side. And so I think your skills can get rusty from disuse. And so the things that I think make it more feasible is, again, kind of having that core group of people that want to, that feel passionate about this set of skills, people that work together to maintain their skills, people that step in and help others to be that mentor and get exposure maybe when it's not their patient or not their caseload, so that they're spreading the wealth and the knowledge that they have. But we're not expecting everyone to have this skill set all the time. It's just not feasible. And then I think having support from the department and the division level leadership to say this is a really important part of what we do, and we need time and resources dedicated to help maintain this core group. So as people turn over, people retire, we need to maintain the core group, otherwise it's going to fall apart. And so having a group that's passionate, who's willing to speak up, willing to articulate those needs is really important, because you're not going to get that unless you're focused on it. Because there's always more demands. There's always more focus, or now AI is going to replace all this and we won't need to do these skills anymore. And we have to be able to say, no, we have people skills. These are really hands-on learning that people need in order to be successful. And in the long run, that makes for a healthier community for all of us. And so we want to, again, kind of expecting everyone to have this is not really a feasible ask in a large system, but having a core group of people that love it and live and breathe it, supporting them so they can maintain those skills, I think is what makes it really, really work.
Thank you. I know we have some questions in the chat, so I'm going to ask one more question and then I'll turn it over to Julie. Travis, my last question is for you. And I think thinking across the spectrum from novice wheelchair users to experienced wheelchair users that have been using a chair for 20 plus years, do you have thoughts on some key checkpoints for maybe when a mobility check-in might be useful that could prompt some further wheelchair skills training?
I mean, I think the obvious one is the every 5 years or so when someone is up for a new chair, the evaluations that go along with with that process would be a good chance. Obviously following an injury or uh, if there were some obvious flaw or adjustment that would, need to be made as a result of an injury, some complication. That's not exactly a proactive way, but you don't want to miss an opportunity to do it then. It would be nice if there were a system that kind of red flagged signs or patterns of like downgrades in health or loss of independence, you know. If there were things that like indicators of decreases in activity, or if you could flag a change in a person's environment or routine, um, just, where additional skill training could right the ship, I think those would be good chances, possible signs, indicators, things that we could pluck out and say, now's the time to intervene and adjust.
Perfect. Great food for thought, I think, as we all reflect on our own clinical practice. Julie, I think there may be some questions in the chat. Maybe I can give the floor to you to pose those to the panel.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for a great session. We've been getting some wonderful questions. I'm going to start with the first one, Travis. This one was directed at you, which was, what was the most useful or meaningful component of your skills training when you were first learning the skills?
For me, it was conquering that fear of falling. It's a very real fear, and it's a skill. Falling is a skill. Being able to do it and avoid injury, or try to anyway, lower leg, hip, wrist, hand. Um, that's the one that I think holds people back a lot is being scared to fall, and then the in addition to that, being able to get up once you've fallen. That floor to chair transfer is pretty high level, but once you know how to fall and once you know you can get up off the ground if you do, it's pretty liberating.
Thank you. We also have a number of questions about resources and logistics. So starting with, we all know the benefits of community mobility, but a big barrier is actually getting management or the higher ups to buy into this and provide time and resources. Do any of you have suggestions of what's worked in terms of making the community mobility option a possibility?
I would say partnering with our RT group has been helpful, and making sure they feel very comfortable with what we're trying to accomplish through our therapy sessions if we're working on that. And again, we have less RTs once we get to outpatient. But if it's that experience of just being exposed to those community thresholds, we do have mobility courtyards that we use that are decorative for the hospital, but have plenty of challenges for new users. And so utilizing that just to get started, so that we can utilize their therapy time, practicing with family on the off hours. I think to Tatiana's point again, it isn't about a lot of equipment, but sometimes having a good chair that they feel comfortable trying the skills in is super important. So if anything, if you're not getting support to get your own chairs, it might be really leaning into those relationships with your vendor partners to find a chair and a setup that this person can really open some doors with, even if it's just for the last few days of their stay, when they're working on getting their own chair.
think one other tidbit I have to add about getting buy-in for support to do these more community outings. I love Darcy's idea of collaborating with recreation therapists. I do that all the time. I think another strategy for getting buy-in is explaining how doing this early on can actually help save you therapy time to do other things. If I can get outside early with people and train them to go up the hill, train them to go up the ramps on the far side of campus, then I can clear them to get a pass to do that by themselves. They can do it on the evenings over the weekends, and then I can do other things back in the gym with them.
I'll just bounce off and say one thing. I agree with both. We've worked with the same barriers with management. Um, what I would say is safety is often a key word for management that speaks to management. Ensuring safety is one way of explaining to management and using evidence. We do have evidence that in training in the community is beneficial and works better. Those are two key things.
Okay, in the last couple minutes, I'm going to try and consolidate a little bit here. There was a question about the logistics of boot camp and equipment and how this is handled in terms of clinicians involved and product reps. I'm also going to say for these questions, on Canvas, you can go into the discussion forum and you can continue this conversation. So if we don't have a chance to fully answer these questions, there will be an opportunity to continue the discussion. But if any of you can comment on the logistics of the boot camp and how clinicians have the time to be involved and what role, if any, product reps have in making that happen.
Our product reps are very involved in working with our vendor partners. So we collaborate on new equipment as it comes in for demonstrations. We do them over lunch so people can come and go as they want. Again, you're looking for those passionate people that really are interested. But the boot camps are given to everyone to kind of level set expectations, level set foundational learning, because people are coming from all different places, and what's prioritized in each person's program seems to be more and more different than similar sometimes with newer grads and when they graduated. So the boot camps are a way to get everyone on that same framework and to help them understand what we're supporting, how to get help. And they are prioritized with our leadership because it helps to maintain the skill set of the group that we have, helps with retention. So a lot of things that, again, to Tatiana's point, what management wants to hear, that helps sell programs. But with our boot camp, it is getting equipment in and having people try really heavy pieces of equipment and very ultra lightweight, highly designed chairs so they can really see the difference and articulate that as a temporary user to someone who is on the fence, or to how justification needs to happen when you're working with people to get their own chairs. But happy to take more offline if you're interested in setting one up for yourself.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, I actually want to jump to our last question here, which is for someone just starting in the wheelchair world, what are good additional resources for helping develop these skills? I think everybody benefits from resources at whatever point you are in your training and learning.
I'm not on the panel, but I'll jump in on part of this, Julie. At Pitt, we did a big cohort study of training clinicians in a randomized control trial, and we have a pretty big video bank and training resources. I'll drop that on the discussion board on Canvas as a resource.
The Wheelchair Skills Training Program, Dalhousie University, does have free resources. The manual is on the website. There are pediatric resources. There's storybooks, posters, and training logs that can be that are accessible, freely accessible. And there's the YouTube channel, the Wheelchair Skills Training Program YouTube channel that can also help learn the skills.
Thank you so much, and thanks for your willingness to post this on the discussion. board on Canvas so people can look there for more resources. And I will go ahead and turn this over to Rachel.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks again to Lynn and the panelists for sharing your experience, expertise. I hope that was helpful for our attendees today. I always learn something from hearing how other people implement wheelchair skills training. With that, I'll encourage you that if you have other questions or questions we didn't get to ask the panelists, please put them in the discussion on the course page now or as you think of things, and feel free to answer other people's questions. If you do something particularly well in your practice or you'd like to share, feel free to do that. At this point, I will share the code for CEU credits. You should be seeing my screen now, 5VB798. For all of the courses today and in February, there is a post-test in the online course page. You answer a few questions and enter the code to get your certificate. The code is also in the chat if that is easier for you to access. I'll read a few more times. 5VB798. 5VB798. Just a few more housekeeping things while I have your attention. Just to make note that if you are planning attending us live with us for day 2, and we hope that you do, that date is February 25th for the second day of the Virtual Professional Summit. And if you do not get our emails or don't follow us on social media and didn't know yet the date for the in-person International Seating Symposium in 2027 are March 31st through April 2nd in Pittsburgh. And you likely will see that slide a few times again if you're joining us for other sessions. With that, I'll leave the code up if you need it again, and we'll see you in 15 minutes for our first partner session. Thank you.